Vancouver stands as one of North America's most striking cities, where gleaming towers pierce the sky against a backdrop of snow-capped mountains and endless ocean. But beneath this modern facade lies a story that few truly know, a tale of transformation so dramatic it defies belief. Tonight, we'll uncover how a remote wilderness became a global metropolis in just over a century. This is the story of a city that shouldn't exist, built on dreams and desperation, shaped by waves of immigrants who crossed oceans to reach the edge of the world. Vancouver has survived economic collapse, racial tensions, natural disasters, and the constant threat of earthquakes to become one of the planet's most livable cities. We'll start with a surprising discovery beneath the busy streets of downtown, and from there, we'll follow the relentless march of progress that carved a city from the coastal rainforest. So settle in and let your imagination drift as we explore the remarkable history of Vancouver, the city that rose on the edge of the Pacific. When you think of Vancouver, perhaps you picture the bustling harbours filled with cargo ships from distant lands, the towering glass condominiums reflecting the North Shore Mountains, or the vibrant neighbourhoods where dozens of languages blend into the urban symphony. This city feels both ancient and impossibly young, a place where thousand-year-old cedar trees stand mere blocks from cutting-edge architecture. But Vancouver's story begins long before the first European ever glimpsed these shores. In the 1980s, during construction work in downtown Vancouver, archaeologists made a startling discovery. Buried beneath the layers of modern civilization, they found evidence of human habitation stretching back thousands of years. Stone tools, fishing implements, and remnants of ancient cooking fires painted a picture of thriving communities that called this place home for millennia. It's remarkable to imagine that here, where business executives hurry between glass towers, Indigenous peoples once gathered salmon and carved canoes from massive cedar logs. The very ground beneath Vancouver's financial district holds secrets of a civilization that understood this land in ways we're only beginning to appreciate. The true human history of what would become Vancouver begins with the Coast Salish peoples, sophisticated societies that had developed complex cultures perfectly adapted to the Pacific Northwest. The Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations didn't simply survive in this challenging environment, they flourished. These weren't primitive societies scratching out a meagre existence. They were master engineers who built magnificent longhouses, skilled artisans who created works of art that still take our breath away, and brilliant strategists who managed resources sustainably for countless generations. The indigenous peoples of this region developed one of the world's most sophisticated, non-agricultural civilizations. They harvested the bounty of both land and sea with a precision that would impress modern environmentalists. Salmon runs were managed with careful timing, cedar forests were harvested without destruction, and complex trade networks stretched from California to Alaska. Their potlatch ceremonies were grand displays of wealth and generosity that could last for days, featuring elaborate feasts and the giving away of precious goods. These communities had established permanent winter villages along the Fraser River and Burrard Inlet thousands of years before any European had ever dreamed of a western passage to the Orient. They had names for every creek, every mountain, every significant landmark in a territory that encompassed far more than modern Vancouver. To them, this wasn't an empty wilderness waiting to be tamed. It was home, complete with its own laws, territories, and ancient agreements between nations. The first Europeans to see this coastline were searching for something entirely different. In the late 18th century, the Pacific Northwest represented the final frontier in the European race to map the world's oceans. Spanish explorers sailing north from Mexico had glimpsed these shores, while British and Russian expeditions pushed south from Alaska. But it was Captain George Vancouver of the Royal Navy who would leave his name on the region during his systematic survey of the coast in the 1790s. Captain Vancouver was methodical to a fault, spending months carefully mapping every inlet, bay and channel along hundreds of miles of coastline. His mission was partly scientific, but mostly strategic. Britain needed to know exactly what lay along this remote shore, especially with Spanish and Russian claims creating potential conflicts. The captain's detailed charts would prove invaluable for decades to come, but he could hardly have imagined that the inlet he named Burrard would one day host one of the world's busiest ports. The early European presence in the region was surprisingly light. Unlike the eastern seaboard of North America, where colonies quickly established permanent settlements, the Pacific Northwest remained largely indigenous territory well into the 19th century. The fur trade brought occasional European and American traders, but these were typically seasonal operations that left little permanent mark on the landscape. The Hudson's Bay Company established Fort Langley on the Fraser River in 1827, marking the first significant European foothold in the region. But this wasn't a settlement in any traditional sense. It was a trading post, a place where indigenous trappers could exchange furs for manufactured goods. The fort's factor and a handful of employees represented the entirety of permanent European presence for miles in any direction. This arrangement worked remarkably well for decades. The fur trade created wealth without requiring massive population movements or territorial displacement. Indigenous peoples remained on their traditional lands, adapting their economic activities to include trapping for the European market. The Hudson's Bay Company made substantial profits, and the British Crown maintained its claim to the territory without expensive military expeditions or colonial administration. But this delicate balance couldn't last forever. By the 1850s, pressures were building that would transform the region completely. The California gold rush had created a population of experienced miners looking for new opportunities. Rumors of gold in the Fraser River Valley began to circulate, and suddenly the remote Pacific Northwest didn't seem quite so remote anymore. The Fraser Canyon Gold Rush of 1858 changed everything. Within months, thousands of prospectors poured into the region, most arriving by ship in what is now Vancouver's harbour before heading up the Fraser River toward the goldfields. The quiet fur trading territory suddenly found itself hosting one of North America's largest population movements. The colonial government, caught completely unprepared, scrambled to establish some semblance of law and order. James Douglas, the former Hudson's Bay Company factor who had become colonial governor, faced the impossible task of managing a territory larger than most European countries, with virtually no infrastructure or administrative apparatus. The gold rush created Vancouver's first real reason to exist. The mouth of the Fraser River became a crucial supply point for miners heading inland. Ships arrived daily carrying everything from pickaxes to salt pork, while smaller vessels ferried goods up the treacherous Fraser Canyon. For the first time, the sheltered waters of Burrard Inlet began to see regular maritime traffic. Most of the gold seekers were Americans, veterans of previous rushes in California and elsewhere. They brought with them not just mining experience, but also expectations about law, government, and economic opportunity that didn't always align with British colonial practices. The potential for conflict was enormous, especially given the ongoing boundary disputes between Britain and the United States. The indigenous peoples of the region found themselves dealing with an unprecedented invasion of their territory. Thousands of miners tramped through traditional fishing sites, set up camps without permission, and often showed little respect for established protocols. Some indigenous leaders attempted to charge tolls or taxes for passage through their territories, leading to tensions that occasionally erupted into violence. Yet despite all the chaos and potential for disaster, the gold rush period also demonstrated something remarkable about this region. The natural geography that had supported indigenous civilizations for millennia proved equally capable of supporting this new kind of economic activity. The deep harbours could accommodate large ships, the river systems provided transportation corridors into the interior, and the abundant forests supplied all the timber needed for construction. The gold rush was relatively short-lived, petering out by the early 1860s as the easily accessible deposits were exhausted. But its impact on the region was permanent. For the first time, significant numbers of non-Indigenous people had seen the economic potential of the Pacific Northwest. More importantly, the infrastructure created to support the miners, the ships, the supply networks, and the rudimentary government structures remained in place when the prospectors moved on. British Columbia officially became a colony in 1858, with New Westminster designated as its capital. This was a deliberate snub to the American miners, many of whom had hoped the region might eventually join the United States. The choice of New Westminster, located up the Fraser River rather than on the coast, reflected the government's focus on the interior and its resources rather than maritime trade. But geography has a way of asserting itself over political decisions. The deep waters of Burrard Inlet and English Bay offered advantages that no amount of government preference could overcome. As the colony began to develop a real economy beyond gold mining, the natural harbour kept drawing attention from entrepreneurs and investors. The 1860s saw the first serious attempts to establish permanent communities around Burrard Inlet. Lumber mills began operating on the North Shore, taking advantage of the enormous trees that grew right down to the water's edge. These weren't small operations. The coastal forests contained some of the largest trees on Earth, Douglas firs and western red cedars that had been growing for centuries before the first Europeans arrived. The lumber industry created Vancouver's first real economy. Ships arrived from San Francisco, Australia, and even Asia to load timber cut from the coastal rainforest. The work was dangerous and demanding, requiring men willing to live in remote camps and face the constant threat of industrial accidents. But the profits were substantial enough to attract serious investment and permanent settlement. By 1870, small communities had formed around the various mills and logging operations scattered around Burrard Inlet. These weren't proper towns yet, just collections of company housing, stores and saloons clustered around the industrial sites. But they represented something new in the region's history: permanent settlements based on extracting and exporting natural resources rather than simply trading with Indigenous peoples. The decision that would ultimately create Vancouver came from an unexpected source: the Canadian government's determination to build a transcontinental railway. When British Columbia joined Confederation in 1871, one of the key promises was that a railway would connect the province to the rest of Canada within 10 years. This seemed like an impossible commitment given the vast distances and challenging terrain involved, but it would prove to be the catalyst that transformed a collection of lumber camps into a major city. The railway debates in Ottawa seemed impossibly distant from the muddy logging camps scattered around Burrard Inlet. Politicians argued over routes and financing, while surveyors struggled through mountain passes that had never seen human footsteps. But the Canadian Pacific Railway would prove to be more than just a transportation project. It was about to create a city from nothing more than ambition and strategic geography. The original plan called for the railway to terminate at Port Moody, a small community at the head of Burrard Inlet. This made perfect sense from an engineering perspective. Port Moody sat at the furthest navigable point inland, minimising the amount of expensive track that would need to be built through the coastal mountains. The government had already begun selling lots and promoting Port Moody as the future terminus of Canada's Great Railway to the Pacific. But the Canadian Pacific Railway Company had different ideas. William Cornelius Van Horn, the railway's general manager, was a man who thought in continental terms. He understood that a successful transcontinental railway needed more than just a place where trains could reach the ocean. It needed a port that could handle the largest ships with room for expansion that would accommodate decades of growth. Port Moody, for all its natural beauty, was hemmed in by mountains and had limited space for the kind of massive railway yards and port facilities Van Horn envisioned. The company's attention turned to the broader waters of English Bay, where Burrard Inlet opened into the Strait of Georgia. Here was deep-water harbour space that could accommodate the largest vessels in the Pacific trade. More importantly, there was room to grow. Miles of relatively flat shoreline stretched along English Bay, perfect for the rail yards, warehouses, and industrial facilities that would be needed to make the terminus truly profitable. There was just one problem. The land the railway company wanted was largely wilderness, dotted with small logging operations and the occasional indigenous settlement. Unlike Port Moody, which already had the beginnings of a proper town, this area would need to be built from scratch. The railway would have to create not just a terminus, but an entire city to go with it. Van Horn was undaunted. He had built railways across the American prairies and knew that successful railroad towns could be created almost overnight if the economic fundamentals were right. The key was to acquire large amounts of land cheaply, then profit from its appreciation as the railway brought development and population. It was a strategy that had created dozens of cities across the American West, and Van Horn saw no reason it wouldn't work on the Canadian Pacific coast. The negotiations between the railway company and the colonial government were complex and sometimes bitter. The company wanted massive land grants and subsidies, arguing that building through the mountain ranges would be so expensive that generous government support was essential. Critics accused the railway of blackmail, threatening to build the line through the United States if Canadian terms weren't acceptable. Meanwhile, the small communities around Burrard Inlet watched these distant negotiations with growing excitement and anxiety. Everyone understood that the railway's decision would determine which settlements would prosper and which would be left behind. Property values fluctuated wildly based on rumours about the route, and more than one fortune was made or lost on speculation about where exactly the trains would reach the Pacific. The breakthrough came in 1884 when the Canadian Pacific Railway reached an agreement with the provincial government. The company would extend its line beyond Port Moody to a new terminus on English Bay. In exchange, the government would grant the railway company over 6,000 acres of prime waterfront land, essentially giving them the power to design and build their own city. This was an extraordinary arrangement, even by the standards of 19th century railway development. The Canadian Pacific Railway would not just operate trains to the coast, they would own the port, control the waterfront, and hold enough land to shape urban development for decades to come. No major North American city had ever been so completely the creation of a single corporation. The railway company moved quickly to capitalize on their opportunity. They hired surveyors to lay out streets and blocks according to a grand master plan. Unlike the haphazard growth that characterized most frontier towns, this new city would be designed from the beginning to handle large-scale commercial and industrial development. Wide streets were platted to accommodate heavy wagon traffic, while the waterfront was reserved for railway yards and shipping facilities. The challenge was deciding what to call this new creation. The railway company considered several options, including Brighton and Liverpool, names that would appeal to British investors and settlers. But ultimately, they chose to honour Captain George Vancouver, whose detailed charts had first revealed the commercial potential of these waters nearly a century earlier. Vancouver seemed appropriate for a city that would serve as Canada's gateway to the Pacific and the markets of Asia beyond. The first lot sales in the new town site of Vancouver took place on May 23, 1887, just hours after the first transcontinental train had arrived at the temporary terminus. The railway company had built anticipation for months, advertising in newspapers across Canada and even in Britain. They promised investors the chance to buy into the ground floor of what would become the greatest port on the Pacific coast. The response exceeded everyone's expectations. Buyers lined up before dawn, and many lots sold for far more than their advertised prices as bidding wars broke out among speculators. In a single day, the Canadian Pacific Railway sold over 200 lots and collected enough money to cover a substantial portion of their land acquisition costs. More importantly, they had created instant momentum for their new city. The first residents of Vancouver were a mixture of railway workers, lumber mill employees, and entrepreneurs hoping to profit from the expected boom. They lived in hastily constructed wooden buildings, often little more than shacks, scattered among the massive tree stumps that dotted the newly surveyed streets. The contrast was surreal. Civilized street grids carved through a landscape that remained fundamentally wild. The early months were chaotic. Vancouver existed more as an idea than as a functioning community. There were no proper roads connecting the town site to the outside world, no reliable sources of fresh water, and no established businesses beyond a few saloons and supply stores. Mail service was irregular, and communication with the outside world depended on steamships that called when weather and tides permitted. Yet despite these challenges, Vancouver grew with astonishing speed. The railway company's aggressive promotion attracted attention throughout Canada and beyond. Newspapers in Toronto and Montreal ran stories about opportunities in the new Pacific terminus, while shipping companies began scheduling regular service to handle the expected cargo traffic. The city that didn't exist in 1885 had over 1,000 residents by the end of 1887. The lumber industry provided Vancouver's economic foundation during these crucial early years. The forests surrounding Burrard Inlet contained some of the finest timber on Earth, and demand from rapidly growing cities like San Francisco and Los Angeles seemed unlimited. Steam-powered sawmills operated around the clock, their whistles marking the rhythm of daily life, while ships waited in the harbour to carry lumber to distant markets. But the railway company had much grander ambitions for their new city. They envisioned Vancouver as the western terminus of a global transportation network that would carry Asian goods across Canada to European markets faster and more efficiently than existing routes through the Suez Canal. This wasn't just about moving Canadian resources to foreign buyers. It was about positioning Vancouver as a crucial link in worldwide commerce. The first major test of this vision came sooner than anyone expected. In 1887, just months after the city's incorporation, the steamship Abyssinia arrived from Yokohama, carrying tea, silk, and other valuable Asian goods consigned to Montreal and New York. The cargo was loaded onto a special Canadian Pacific train that raced across the continent, reaching Atlantic ports days ahead of competing routes. Vancouver had proven its potential as a Pacific gateway, and investors took notice. The success of these early trans-Pacific shipments attracted steamship companies from around the world. Within 5 years, regular service connected Vancouver to Hong Kong, Shanghai, and other major Asian ports. The city's harbour, which had been empty except for lumber ships just a few years earlier, now hosted vessels flying dozens of different flags. Vancouver was becoming exactly what the railway company had promised, a meeting point between East and West, where the products of different continents changed hands. This rapid commercial development brought new challenges and opportunities. Vancouver needed banks to handle international trade financing, warehouses to store goods in transit, and a growing workforce to manage the expanding port operations. The city's population swelled as word spread about employment opportunities, but housing and infrastructure struggled to keep pace with demand. The Canadian Pacific Railway found itself in the unexpected position of being not just a transportation company, but also a city planner, real estate developer, and municipal service provider. They built the first electric lighting system, organised fire protection services, and even operated streetcar lines to connect different parts of their growing city. It was an enormous responsibility that went far beyond their original mandate of simply reaching the Pacific Ocean. The railway's urban experiment was about to face its first major crisis. On June 13, 1886, barely 2 months after the city's official incorporation, disaster struck with devastating swiftness. A land-clearing fire, set by railway workers to burn brush and stumps from the newly platted streets, escaped control as afternoon winds picked up from the inlet. Within hours, almost the entire business district was consumed by flames that leaped from building to building with terrifying speed. The Great Vancouver Fire, as it came to be known, destroyed virtually everything the young city had managed to build. Hotels, stores, the newly constructed City Hall, and hundreds of homes vanished in a matter of hours. Residents fled toward the waterfront, carrying whatever possessions they could manage, while others took refuge in the harbour itself, standing neck-deep in the cold Pacific water as flames roared through the streets behind them. When the smoke finally cleared, Vancouver looked like a war zone. Twisted metal and charred timber marked where the business district had stood just hours before. The death toll was mercifully low, fewer than 30 people, but the economic devastation was complete. Years of investment and months of frantic construction had been reduced to ash in a single afternoon. Many observers predicted that this would mark the end of the railway company's ambitious urban experiment. Instead, the fire became a defining moment that revealed something remarkable about Vancouver's character. Rather than abandoning their investment, the Canadian Pacific Railway immediately announced plans to rebuild bigger and better than before. More surprisingly, many of the merchants and residents who had lost everything chose to stay and start over. There was something about this place, this combination of natural beauty and commercial potential, that inspired a resilience few had expected. The rebuilding process transformed Vancouver from a collection of wooden shacks into a proper city. New fire regulations required brick and stone construction in the downtown core, giving the rebuilt business district a permanence and grandeur that the original settlement had lacked. Streets were widened and properly graded, while a professional fire department was established to prevent future disasters. The Canadian Pacific Railway used the reconstruction as an opportunity to implement their grandest visions for the city. They built the magnificent Hotel Vancouver, a chateau-style palace that rivaled the finest accommodations in Montreal or Toronto. The hotel wasn't just a place for travellers to stay, it was a statement of confidence, a declaration that Vancouver was destined to become one of Canada's great cities. The railway company also constructed elaborate passenger terminals and freight yards that could handle the largest ships in Pacific service. These weren't temporary facilities built to meet immediate needs. They were permanent installations designed to accommodate decades of growth. The message was clear. Vancouver wasn't just surviving its early crisis, it was positioning itself to become the dominant port on the entire Pacific coast. This confidence proved justified as the 1890s brought unprecedented growth and prosperity. The completion of the Canadian Pacific Railway had opened new markets for British Columbia's natural resources, while Vancouver's port facilities made it the obvious choice for companies looking to export lumber, fish and minerals to Asia. The city's population doubled, then doubled again, as workers arrived from across Canada and around the world. The ethnic composition of this growing city was unlike anything else in Canada. Chinese immigrants, many of whom had worked on railway construction, established a thriving community in what became known as Chinatown. Their businesses, temples, and cultural institutions added a distinctly Asian character to certain neighborhoods, creating a cosmopolitan atmosphere that was rare in North American cities of the era. Japanese immigrants followed, drawn by opportunities in the fishing industry and lumber trade. They brought different skills and cultural traditions, establishing their own distinct community while contributing to the city's growing reputation as a Pacific Rim metropolis. European immigrants from Scandinavia, Germany, and Eastern Europe also arrived in large numbers, each group adding to the cultural complexity of this rapidly evolving city. This diversity created both opportunities and tensions. Vancouver's economy benefited enormously from the varied skills and international connections these immigrant communities provided. Chinese merchants facilitated trade with Asia, while Scandinavian loggers and fishermen brought expertise perfectly suited to the Pacific Northwest environment. European craftsmen contributed to the city's construction boom, building the elaborate Victorian mansions that still grace certain neighbourhoods. However, this cosmopolitan character also generated conflicts that would plague Vancouver for decades. Many established residents, primarily of British or Eastern Canadian origin, viewed the growing immigrant populations with suspicion and sometimes hostility. Economic competition intensified these tensions, as immigrant workers were often willing to accept lower wages than their Canadian-born counterparts. The provincial and federal governments responded to these pressures with increasingly restrictive immigration policies. The Chinese Immigration Act imposed a head tax on Chinese immigrants that made it extremely difficult for working-class families to bring relatives to Canada. Similar restrictions targeted other Asian immigrant groups, creating a legal framework that explicitly favoured European immigration while discouraging Asian settlement. These policies reflected broader attitudes that would shape Vancouver's development for generations. The city's economy depended heavily on trade with Asia and immigrant labour, yet many residents remained ambivalent about the cultural changes that accompanied this economic success. This tension between economic necessity and cultural anxiety would resurface repeatedly throughout Vancouver's history. Despite these social challenges, the city's economic growth continued at a breakneck pace through the 1890s and into the new century. The discovery of gold in the Klondike brought thousands of prospectors through Vancouver's port, creating a bonanza for local merchants and service providers. Unlike previous gold rushes, which had bypassed the city entirely, the Klondike rush made Vancouver a crucial supply point and departure hub for the northern goldfields. The Klondike boom demonstrated Vancouver's strategic advantages in ways that even the railway company hadn't fully anticipated. The city's location made it the natural staging ground for any economic activity in Alaska or the Northern Territories. Ships could load supplies in Vancouver's protected harbour, then steam north through the Inside Passage to reach the goldfields more easily than from any other major port. Local entrepreneurs seized these opportunities with remarkable creativity. Outfitting stores sold everything from Arctic clothing to dog sleds, while hotels and restaurants catered to prospectors preparing for the journey north. Some Vancouver businesses even established branches in Dawson City and other Klondike communities, creating the city's first international commercial networks. The wealth generated by the Klondike trade funded Vancouver's transformation from a frontier town into a genuine metropolis. Grand office buildings rose along Hastings Street, while elaborate residential neighbourhoods spread across the city's expanding boundaries. The streetcar system grew to connect previously isolated districts, while electric lighting replaced gas lamps throughout the downtown core. Cultural institutions began to reflect the city's growing sophistication and self-confidence. The Vancouver Opera House opened in 1891, hosting touring companies from New York and London. Libraries, museums, and social clubs provided intellectual life for the growing middle class, while numerous churches served the spiritual needs of the diverse population. Vancouver was developing the full range of institutions expected in a major city. The turn of the century brought new challenges that would test Vancouver's resilience once again. The Klondike boom was winding down, removing a major source of revenue and economic activity. More seriously, competition from other Pacific ports was intensifying as Seattle and Portland invested heavily in their own harbour facilities and transportation networks. Vancouver could no longer take its commercial dominance for granted. The response to these challenges revealed how much the city had matured since its chaotic early years. Rather than simply reacting to events, Vancouver's business and political leaders began planning strategically for long-term growth. They lobbied successfully for federal investment in harbour improvements, turning the port into one of the most modern and efficient on the Pacific coast. The city also began diversifying its economic base beyond simple resource extraction and shipping. Manufacturing industries took root, processing local raw materials into finished goods for both domestic and export markets. Sawmills evolved into furniture factories, while fish canneries developed into sophisticated food processing operations. Vancouver was becoming a centre of industrial production, not just a shipping point for raw materials. This economic evolution attracted new waves of immigration and investment. British capital flowed into Vancouver's growing industries, while immigrants from across Europe brought the skills needed for manufacturing operations. The city's population approached 100,000 by 1910, making it one of the largest urban centres in Western Canada. The physical transformation was equally dramatic. Downtown Vancouver now boasted buildings that would have seemed impossible just 2 decades earlier. The Dominion Building, completed in 1910, rose 17 stories above Hastings Street, dominating the skyline and symbolising the city's ambitions. Electric streetcars connected neighbourhoods that sprawled far beyond the original railway company town site, while telephone lines and electric power grids provided modern conveniences that rivaled anything available in eastern Canada. Yet for all its rapid growth and modernisation, Vancouver remained fundamentally shaped by its unique geography and location. The mountains, ocean, and forests that had first attracted Indigenous peoples thousands of years earlier continue to define the city's character and possibilities. This wasn't just another industrial city that happened to be located on the Pacific coast. It was a place where urban civilization existed in constant dialogue with some of the most spectacular natural landscapes on Earth. This relationship between city and wilderness would become increasingly important as Vancouver entered its second quarter-century of existence. The challenge was no longer simply surviving and growing, but figuring out how to preserve what made the city special while accommodating the demands of an increasingly complex urban society. The answers to that challenge would determine whether Vancouver would become just another large city or something truly extraordinary. The answer came from an unexpected source, a visionary park commissioner named Jonathan Rogers, who understood that Vancouver's greatest asset wasn't its port or its railways, but the extraordinary landscape that surrounded the growing city. In 1888, just 2 years after the Great Fire, Rogers had proposed something radical, setting aside over 1,000 acres of pristine forest on a peninsula jutting into English Bay as a public park. Most city councillors thought the idea was madness, prime waterfront property that could be sold to developers for enormous profits. But Rogers persisted, arguing that great cities needed great parks, places where residents could escape urban pressures and reconnect with the natural world that made their location unique. He pointed to Central Park in New York and Hyde Park in London as examples of how preserved green space could enhance rather than diminish urban development. After months of heated debate, the City Council narrowly approved the creation of what would become Stanley Park. The decision proved to be one of the most far-sighted in Vancouver's history. Stanley Park became the city's crown jewel, a 1,000-acre wilderness preserve that remained almost untouched despite being surrounded by urban development. Ancient Douglas firs and massive cedars, some over 800 years old, created cathedral-like groves where city dwellers could walk among giants that had been growing when Vikings first reached North America. The park's creation established a precedent that would shape Vancouver's development for the next century. Unlike most North American cities which sacrificed natural features for economic gain, Vancouver began to understand that its spectacular setting was not an obstacle to overcome, but an advantage to preserve and enhance. This philosophy would eventually influence everything from building heights to transportation planning. The early years of the new century brought challenges that tested this commitment to balancing growth with environmental preservation. Vancouver's population continued to surge, driven by immigration from Britain, Eastern Canada, and increasingly from Asia, despite restrictive government policies. The pressure for new housing and commercial development was enormous, and developers eyed every available piece of land with increasing hunger. The solution came through innovative urban planning that worked with the city's natural topography rather than against it. Neighbourhoods were designed to follow the contours of hills and shorelines, creating organic street patterns that preserved views and green corridors. Building codes encouraged architectural styles that complemented the landscape, leading to the distinctive West Coast aesthetic that combined elements of British colonial, arts and crafts, and emerging modernist influences. This approach to development created a city unlike any other in North America. Vancouver's residential neighbourhoods featured tree-lined streets that seemed to blend seamlessly into the surrounding forests. Views of mountains and ocean were protected by height restrictions and strategic placement of buildings. The result was an urban environment that felt more like a collection of garden communities than a traditional industrial city. The First World War brought profound changes that accelerated Vancouver's transformation from a regional centre into a city of international significance. The conflict created massive demand for the province's natural resources, particularly lumber and minerals needed for the war effort. Vancouver's port became crucial for shipping these materials to Britain and other allied nations, while the city's shipyards began building vessels for the expanding merchant marine. The war also brought tragedy and social upheaval that revealed deep tensions within Vancouver's diverse population. Anti-German sentiment led to the internment of residents with German ancestry, while suspicion fell on other immigrant communities despite their demonstrated loyalty to Canada. The city's cosmopolitan character, which had been a source of economic strength, suddenly became a liability in an atmosphere of wartime paranoia. More troubling were the racial tensions that erupted into violence against Asian communities. The 1907 riots had already demonstrated the volatility of ethnic relations in the city, and wartime pressures intensified these conflicts. Despite contributing significantly to the war effort and the city's economy, Chinese and Japanese residents faced increasing discrimination and legal restrictions that limited their participation in civic life. Yet the war also brought opportunities that would reshape Vancouver's economy and society. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers, taking jobs in shipyards, munitions factories, and offices previously reserved for men. This shift challenged traditional social arrangements and laid the groundwork for broader changes in the post-war period. The city was discovering that its greatest resource was not just its natural endowments, but the diverse talents of its population. The wartime boom transformed Vancouver's industrial capacity beyond recognition. New factories producing everything from aircraft components to processed foods created thousands of jobs and attracted workers from across Western Canada. The city's shipyards launched vessels that carried vital supplies across the Pacific, establishing Vancouver as a major centre of marine construction and engineering. This industrial expansion required massive infrastructure investments that permanently altered the city's physical structure. New rail lines connected factories to the port, while expanded electrical generation provided power for heavy industry. The harbour was deepened and extended to accommodate larger vessels, while new warehouses and storage facilities created an industrial landscape along the waterfront that dwarfed the original railway terminus. The end of the war, in 1918, brought both celebration and uncertainty. Vancouver had proven its importance to the national war effort, but the sudden cancellation of military contracts threatened economic collapse. Thousands of returning veterans needed jobs and housing in a city already struggling with wartime growth. The challenge was transitioning from a wartime economy to sustainable peacetime prosperity. The solution came through diversification and innovation that built on wartime industrial development. Companies that had produced military supplies retooled for civilian markets, while new industries emerged to serve the growing population of Western Canada and the Pacific Rim. Vancouver was evolving from a resource shipping port into a genuine manufacturing centre, with the capacity to produce finished goods for both domestic and international markets. The 1920s brought a cultural renaissance that matched the city's economic transformation. Vancouver began to develop its own artistic and intellectual identity, distinct from the Eastern Canadian cultural establishment that had previously dominated national life. Local artists drew inspiration from the dramatic landscape surrounding the city, while writers and poets found their voice in describing the unique experience of life on the Pacific frontier. The group of 7 painters, though based in Eastern Canada, made regular expeditions to British Columbia, drawn by landscapes that challenged their artistic vision in entirely new ways. Their canvases captured the brooding power of coastal mountains and the mysterious depths of old-growth forests, helping to establish a distinctly Canadian aesthetic that owed nothing to European traditions. Local cultural institutions flourished during this period of growth and prosperity. The Vancouver Symphony Orchestra was founded in 1919, while new theatres and concert halls provided venues for both local and touring performers. The city's growing wealth supported an increasingly sophisticated cultural life that attracted talent from across Canada and beyond. Architecture during the 1920s reflected Vancouver's growing confidence and unique character. The Marine Building, completed in 1930, rose 25 stories above Burrard Street in an Art Deco style that incorporated motifs from Pacific marine life. Its elaborate facade featured seahorses, shells, and other oceanic imagery, creating a skyscraper that was unmistakably of its place rather than a copy of New York or Chicago models. Residential architecture also evolved to reflect the city's distinctive setting and climate. The California bungalow style, adapted for Vancouver's cooler, wetter conditions, created neighborhoods of low-profile homes with deep eaves and extensive porches. These houses were designed to maximize natural light during the grey winter months, while providing comfortable outdoor living spaces during the brief but glorious Pacific Northwest summers. The automobile arrived in Vancouver during the 1920s, bringing both opportunities and challenges that would reshape the city's development patterns. Unlike Eastern Canadian cities, which had been largely built before the automotive age, Vancouver was still expanding rapidly when cars became common. This timing allowed the city to plan for automobile access while preserving the walkable neighborhoods and public transit systems that defined its character. The result was a unique urban form that combined the best features of both pedestrian and automotive planning. Neighborhoods remained compact and walkable, with local shopping districts accessible on foot, while a growing network of boulevards and bridges connected different parts of the expanding metropolitan area. Vancouver was pioneering a new model of urban development that would influence city planning across North America. The late 1920s brought new waves of immigration that added fresh complexity to Vancouver's already diverse population. Economic prosperity in Canada attracted Europeans fleeing political instability and economic hardship in the aftermath of the Great War. These new arrivals brought different skills, traditions, and perspectives that enriched the city's cultural life while creating new challenges for social integration. The opening of the Panama Canal in 1914 had begun to shift global shipping patterns in ways that benefited Vancouver enormously. Ships travelling between Europe and Asia could now choose between the traditional Suez Canal route and the newer Panama Canal passage, with Vancouver positioned to capture traffic from either direction. The city's port facilities expanded to handle this increased volume, while shipping companies established permanent offices and operations in the growing commercial district. By 1929, Vancouver had become one of the major ports on the Pacific Ocean, handling cargo from dozens of countries and serving as the western terminus for transcontinental trade routes that connected Asian markets with European consumers. The young city that had barely existed 40 years earlier was now a crucial link in the global economy, its prosperity tied to trade flows that spanned the world's largest ocean. The stock market crash of October 1929 seemed initially like a distant problem that might not significantly affect a city whose economy was based on natural resources and Pacific trade rather than financial speculation. Vancouver's business leaders assured residents that the city's solid economic fundamentals would protect it from the worst effects of the economic turmoil spreading across North America. They were about to discover just how interconnected the modern world had become, and how quickly prosperity could vanish when global economic systems collapsed. The reality of the Great Depression hit Vancouver with stunning force. Within months of the stock market crash, the city's carefully constructed prosperity began to crumble. The international trade that had seemed so secure suddenly evaporated as countries around the world imposed tariffs and restrictions to protect their domestic industries. Ships that had once crowded the harbour now sat empty at distant ports, their owners unable to afford cargo or fuel for Pacific crossings. The lumber industry, which had provided the foundation for Vancouver's economy since the railway's arrival, faced complete collapse. American demand disappeared almost overnight as construction ground to a halt across the continent. The massive sawmills that had operated around the clock for decades began laying off workers by the thousands. The sound of steam whistles and machinery, which had provided the soundtrack to daily life in Vancouver, grew increasingly rare as mill after mill shut down operations. The human cost was devastating. By 1932, nearly 30% of Vancouver's workforce was unemployed. Bread lines stretched for blocks outside soup kitchens established by churches and charitable organisations. Families who had enjoyed middle-class comfort just years earlier found themselves unable to pay rent or buy food. The shanty town that sprang up along False Creek became home to thousands of men who had lost everything and had nowhere else to go. The provincial and federal governments seemed paralysed by the scale of the crisis. Traditional approaches to economic downturns, waiting for markets to recover naturally, proved completely inadequate when the entire global economy had collapsed. Vancouver's mayor and city council found themselves managing not just municipal services, but emergency relief efforts that stretched far beyond anything they had been prepared to handle. Relief camps were established throughout British Columbia, employing single men on public works projects for subsistence wages. These camps became a source of ongoing tension, as the men working in them organised protests and strikes demanding better conditions and fair wages. Vancouver became the focal point for these demonstrations, as unemployed workers from across the province converged on the city seeking work or assistance. The On to Ottawa Trek of 1935 began in Vancouver's relief camps and ended in riots in Regina, but not before demonstrating the depth of frustration and desperation that had built up during years of economic stagnation. Hundreds of unemployed men boarded freight trains in Vancouver, determined to carry their grievances directly to the federal government. The trek captured national attention and sympathy, highlighting the failure of existing policies to address the human dimensions of the economic crisis. Yet even during these darkest years, Vancouver's fundamental advantages remained intact. The magnificent natural setting that had first attracted settlement continued to inspire and sustain residents who had lost everything else. Stanley Park became a refuge where families could escape the stress of unemployment and poverty, walking among ancient trees that had survived countless storms over the centuries. The mountains and ocean provided both spiritual comfort and practical opportunities for those resourceful enough to fish, hunt, or forage for food. The city's diverse population, which had sometimes been a source of tension, proved to be a source of resilience during the Depression. Different ethnic communities shared resources and supported each other through traditional mutual aid societies and informal networks. Chinese merchants provided credit to struggling customers, while European immigrants drew on old world traditions of communal support to help neighbours survive the crisis. Cultural life somehow continued despite economic hardship. The Little Theatre movement flourished as residents sought inexpensive entertainment and creative outlets. Local musicians, artists and writers found audiences hungry for distraction from daily struggles. The Vancouver Art Gallery, founded in 1931 at the height of the Depression, provided evidence that, even in the worst of times, the city's residents valued beauty and creativity. The federal election of 1935 brought new political leadership that promised more active government intervention in the economy. The Liberal government of Mackenzie King introduced programs that provided direct assistance to unemployed workers and funded public works projects designed to stimulate economic recovery. Vancouver benefited from several major construction projects, including improvements to the harbour and new government buildings that provided both immediate employment and long-term infrastructure. The late 1930s brought gradual signs of economic recovery, though prosperity remained fragile and uneven. International tensions in Europe and Asia began to increase demand for Canadian raw materials, while New Deal programs in the United States created markets for British Columbia lumber and minerals. Vancouver's port facilities, which had been largely idle for years, began to see increased activity as global trade slowly resumed. The approach of another world war brought mixed emotions to a city still recovering from economic devastation. The prospect of renewed military spending promised jobs and economic stimulus, but residents who had lived through the previous conflict understood the human costs that would accompany any return to hostilities. Vancouver's strategic location on the Pacific Ocean would make it crucial to any war effort involving Asia, bringing both opportunities and dangers to the city. The outbreak of war in Europe in September 1939 immediately transformed Vancouver's economy and society. Unlike the gradual mobilization of the previous conflict, this war required immediate and massive industrial expansion. The city's shipyards, which had been operating at minimal capacity during the Depression, suddenly received contracts for dozens of merchant vessels and military ships. Within months, thousands of workers were employed in marine construction and related industries. The federal government designated Vancouver as a major centre for aircraft production, leading to the construction of enormous factories that manufactured fighter planes and training aircraft for the Commonwealth Air Training Plan. These facilities required tens of thousands of workers with specialised skills, leading to massive training programs and migration from across Canada. The city that had struggled with unemployment just years earlier now faced labour shortages in critical industries. Women again entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers, taking jobs in shipyards, aircraft factories, and munitions plants that had previously been exclusively male domains. The iconic image of Rosie the Riveter found its Canadian equivalent in the thousands of women who built the ships and planes that would carry the war to distant theatres. These workers challenged traditional gender roles while demonstrating skills and capabilities that would permanently alter social expectations. The war also brought new challenges related to Vancouver's position as a Pacific port. The attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 brought the conflict directly to the Pacific Ocean, raising fears that the West Coast might face enemy attacks. Blackout drills became routine, while military installations were established throughout the metropolitan area to defend against possible invasion attempts. The treatment of Japanese Canadians during the war represented one of the darkest chapters in Vancouver's history. Despite their demonstrated loyalty and significant contributions to the city's economy, residents of Japanese ancestry were forcibly removed from their homes and businesses in 1942. Entire families were sent to internment camps in the interior, while their property was confiscated and sold at below-market prices. The vibrant Japanese community that had been part of Vancouver's character for decades was effectively destroyed by government policy driven by wartime hysteria and long-standing racial prejudice. The injustice of Japanese internment was recognized even at the time by some Vancouver residents, but wartime pressures and existing prejudices prevented effective opposition. The policy would remain a source of shame and regret for decades to come, eventually leading to formal government apologies and compensation programs. The empty buildings and abandoned businesses in what had been Japantown served as visible reminders of how quickly democratic societies could abandon their principles under pressure. Despite this moral failure, Vancouver's contribution to the Allied war effort was enormous and impressive. The city's shipyards built over 200 vessels during the conflict, including merchant ships that carried vital supplies across submarine-infested oceans. Local aircraft factories produced thousands of training planes that prepared pilots from across the British Commonwealth for combat operations. The port facilities handled millions of tons of cargo destined for Allied forces in the Pacific Theatre. The war years also saw remarkable innovations in industrial production and urban planning. Government investment in new technologies and manufacturing processes positioned Vancouver's industries for post-war competition in global markets. Housing projects were constructed to accommodate the influx of defence workers, introducing new concepts in community planning and design that would influence residential development for decades to come. The social changes brought by wartime mobilization were equally significant. Vancouver's population became more integrated as workers from different backgrounds labored together in defense plants and shipyards. Traditional ethnic divisions began to break down under the pressure of shared national purpose, though racial prejudices certainly persisted and would continue to influence city life well into the post-war period. Victory in 1945 brought celebration and relief, but also uncertainty about Vancouver's future. The massive defence industries that had provided full employment would no longer be needed in peacetime, while thousands of returning veterans would require jobs and housing in a city already stretched beyond capacity. The challenge was converting wartime industrial capacity to civilian production while maintaining the prosperity that had finally returned after more than a decade of economic hardship. The transition proved remarkably successful, largely because Vancouver had developed the industrial infrastructure and skilled workforce needed to compete in peacetime markets. Shipyards that had built warships began constructing merchant vessels and fishing boats for civilian customers. Aircraft factories converted to producing civilian planes and industrial equipment. The city had emerged from the war as a genuine manufacturing centre with the capacity to serve markets throughout the Pacific region. The post-war housing boom created entirely new neighbourhoods as returning veterans started families and sought the suburban lifestyle that had become the North American dream. Developers built thousands of single-family homes on the city's expanding periphery, creating communities that combined urban conveniences with access to the outdoor recreation opportunities that made Vancouver unique. These neighbourhoods featured the ranch-style and split-level houses that were popular throughout North America, but adapted to the local climate and topography. The late 1940s and 1950s brought unprecedented prosperity and growth that transformed Vancouver into a major metropolitan area. The population approached 500,000 by 1960, while the surrounding suburbs grew even faster as families sought more space and newer homes. The automobile became essential to daily life as the city spread across a much larger geographic area than had been possible in the streetcar era. This suburban expansion required massive infrastructure investments that reshaped the entire region. New highways connected distant neighbourhoods to downtown employment centres, while bridges spanned rivers and inlets that had previously been major barriers to development. The Second Narrows Bridge, completed in 1960, opened up the North Shore to large-scale residential development while providing crucial connections for industrial traffic. The economic boom was driven by more than just population growth and suburban development. Vancouver had become the undisputed commercial centre of Western Canada, with head offices, banks and professional services that served clients throughout the region. The discovery of oil and natural gas in Alberta created new wealth that flowed through Vancouver's financial institutions, while the city's port facilities handled increasing volumes of grain, lumber, and other commodities destined for Asian markets. Cultural life flourished during these prosperous years as Vancouver developed institutions and attractions worthy of a major metropolitan area. The Queen Elizabeth Theatre opened in 1959, providing a world-class venue for opera, ballet, and symphony performances. The University of British Columbia expanded rapidly, becoming one of Canada's leading research universities, while attracting students and faculty from around the world. Professional sports teams gave the city a sense of identity and pride that extended far beyond local boundaries. The late 1950s and early 1960s also brought the first serious discussions about urban planning and environmental protection that would eventually distinguish Vancouver from most other North American cities. Concerned citizens began to question whether unlimited growth and suburban sprawl were compatible with preserving the natural beauty that made their city special. These debates would intensify in the following decades as development pressures continued to mount. The transformation of Vancouver from a frontier lumber town to a major metropolitan area had taken less than 80 years, a remarkably short time in urban history. Yet the city had managed to retain much of its original character while adapting to the demands of modern life. The challenge for the next phase of development would be maintaining this balance as Vancouver prepared to take its place among the great cities of the Pacific Rim. The 1960s brought changes to Vancouver that would have seemed impossible just a generation earlier. The quiet provincial city was about to become a player on the world stage, driven by forces that originated thousands of miles away in the corridors of power in Ottawa and the boardrooms of international corporations. The decision to award the 1986 World's Fair to Vancouver seemed audacious to many observers. This was a city that had never hosted an event of truly international significance, competing against established world capitals with decades of experience managing global spectacles. Yet Vancouver's bid succeeded precisely because it offered something different, a chance to showcase a young city that embodied the optimism and possibilities of the Pacific century that many believed was dawning. But Expo 86 was still 2 decades away, when Vancouver entered what would become known as its adolescent phase. The city was growing rapidly, but hadn't yet discovered what kind of metropolis it wanted to become. The tensions between preservation and development, between local character and international ambitions, were about to play out in ways that would permanently shape Vancouver's identity. The first major test came with urban renewal projects that threatened to transform downtown Vancouver beyond recognition. Like cities across North America, Vancouver's planners embraced the modernist vision of towers rising from open plazas, connected by elevated walkways that would separate pedestrians from automobile traffic. The human-scale neighbourhoods that had evolved organically over decades were suddenly seen as obsolete obstacles to efficient urban living. Fortunately for Vancouver's future character, these grand plans encountered fierce resistance from residents who understood instinctively that something precious was at stake. The battle over the proposed freeway system became particularly intense, as engineers drew lines on maps that would have carved expressways through established neighbourhoods and along the waterfront. Citizens organised with a sophistication that surprised city officials, using new tactics borrowed from the environmental and civil rights movements sweeping across North America. The freeway fights of the late 1960s and early 1970s established Vancouver as a pioneer in citizen-led urban planning. Neighbourhood groups successfully argued that cities were more than just efficient transportation networks, that the quality of life depended on preserving walkable communities where people could live, work and play without depending entirely on automobiles. This grassroots activism laid the foundation for the planning philosophies that would eventually make Vancouver a model for sustainable urban development. The victory over the freeways was just the beginning of a broader transformation in how Vancouver approached growth and development. The old model of unlimited expansion gave way to more nuanced thinking about density, design, and environmental impact. Developers found themselves facing new requirements for public consultation and design review, while city planners began to consider factors beyond simple economic efficiency. This shift coincided with broader cultural changes that were reshaping cities throughout the Western world. The counterculture movement of the 1960s found particular resonance in Vancouver, where the spectacular natural setting seemed to validate alternative lifestyles that emphasized harmony with the environment. The city became a magnet for young people seeking alternatives to the corporate conformity that dominated other major centers. The arrival of thousands of American draft resistors during the Vietnam War added another dimension to Vancouver's evolving character. These were often highly educated young men who brought skills, perspectives, and political consciousness that enriched the city's intellectual life while challenging conventional attitudes about everything from foreign policy to personal lifestyle choices. Their presence helped establish Vancouver as a haven for progressive politics and social experimentation. The environmental movement found particularly fertile ground in a city surrounded by forests, mountains, and ocean that provided daily reminders of what was at stake in the broader struggle over industrial development and resource extraction. Vancouver activists were among the first to organise against clear-cut logging practices, while others focused on protecting the marine environment from pollution and overdevelopment. These local efforts connected to broader international movements, giving Vancouver residents a sense of participating in global efforts to address environmental degradation. The early 1970s brought economic challenges that tested Vancouver's commitment to its evolving values. The oil crisis and global recession created unemployment and financial pressures that made environmental protection and careful planning seem like luxuries the city couldn't afford. Developers and business leaders argued that restrictive regulations would drive investment elsewhere, leaving Vancouver unable to compete with cities willing to sacrifice environmental quality for economic growth. The response revealed how deeply the new planning philosophy had taken root. Rather than abandoning environmental standards, Vancouver's leaders looked for creative ways to make sustainability economically attractive. Mixed-use developments that combined residential, commercial, and office space in walkable neighbourhoods proved both profitable and popular. Green building standards, initially seen as costly burdens, attracted businesses and residents who valued environmental responsibility. The 1976 Olympics, awarded to Montreal, provided Vancouver with a cautionary example of how major international events could bankrupt cities that failed to plan carefully. The massive cost overruns and white elephant facilities left behind by the Montreal Olympics became arguments for a different approach to urban development, one that emphasized projects that would benefit residents long after the television cameras had departed. This lesson influenced Vancouver's approach to Expo 86 from the earliest planning stages. Rather than building temporary structures that would require expensive removal, the city insisted that exposition facilities be designed for conversion to permanent uses. The exposition site on False Creek was planned as a future residential neighbourhood, while transportation improvements were integrated into long-term regional planning rather than treated as one-time Olympic investments. The late 1970s and early 1980s brought new waves of immigration that added fresh complexity to Vancouver's cultural landscape. Political upheavals in Chile, Vietnam, and other countries brought refugees who established new communities while contributing professional skills and entrepreneurial energy. The city's traditional tolerance for diversity was tested by the rapid pace of cultural change, but generally proved resilient enough to accommodate newcomers while maintaining social cohesion. The most significant immigration wave began in the early 1980s as wealthy families from Hong Kong began moving capital and businesses to Vancouver in anticipation of the territory's return to Chinese control. This represented a fundamentally different kind of immigration than the city had experienced previously. These were not refugees or workers seeking better economic opportunities, but established business families with substantial resources looking for stable political environments where they could preserve and expand their wealth. The impact on Vancouver was immediate and dramatic. Real estate prices soared as wealthy immigrants competed for properties in the most desirable neighbourhoods. Local residents found themselves priced out of communities where their families had lived for generations, creating resentments that would complicate ethnic relations for decades to come. The economic benefits were undeniable, as Hong Kong money funded everything from major construction projects to small businesses, but the social costs were equally real. The architectural landscape began to change as new residents brought different aesthetic preferences and functional requirements. Traditional Vancouver houses, designed for nuclear families with modest entertaining needs, were replaced by larger structures that could accommodate extended families and formal social obligations. Critics complained about monster houses that overwhelmed their lots and disrupted neighbourhood character, while defenders argued that architectural diversity reflected the city's multicultural reality. These tensions played out against the backdrop of preparation for Expo 86, which was transforming large sections of the city as new hotels, transportation systems, and exhibition facilities took shape. The exposition provided a deadline that forced resolution of planning disputes that might otherwise have dragged on for years, while the promise of international attention created pressure to present Vancouver at its best. The Canada Line, built to connect downtown Vancouver with the airport in time for Expo 86, represented the city's commitment to public transit as an alternative to automobile-dependent development. The system was designed not just to move exposition visitors, but to support long-term urban development patterns that would reduce sprawl while providing residents with convenient alternatives to driving. This integration of transportation planning with urban development would become a Vancouver hallmark, copied by cities around the world. The exposition itself, which ran from May through October 1986, exceeded all expectations for attendance and international impact. Over 20 million visitors experienced Vancouver's unique combination of urban sophistication and natural beauty, while media coverage introduced the city to global audiences who had never heard of this Pacific Northwest metropolis. The exposition's success provided proof that Vancouver had arrived as a destination worthy of international attention and investment. More importantly, Expo 86 demonstrated Vancouver's ability to manage complex projects while maintaining the environmental and design standards that distinguish the city from other major centres. The exposition sites were successfully converted to residential and commercial uses, creating new neighbourhoods rather than abandoned facilities. The transportation improvements integrated seamlessly into existing systems, providing lasting benefits that justified their costs long after the exposition had ended. The post-Expo period brought new challenges as Vancouver struggled to manage success rather than overcome failure. The international attention generated by the exposition attracted investment and immigration on a scale that threatened to overwhelm the planning systems and community values that had made the city attractive in the first place. The question was whether Vancouver could grow without losing the characteristics that made it special. The late 1980s and early 1990s brought a construction boom that transformed the downtown skyline while creating entirely new neighbourhoods on former industrial lands. The conversion of False Creek from a polluted industrial waterway into a model residential community demonstrated how cities could reclaim degraded areas while creating environments that enhanced rather than diminished quality of life. The success of False Creek influenced urban planning decisions across North America, establishing Vancouver as a leader in sustainable development practices. The 1991 recession provided a pause that allowed reflection on the pace and direction of urban change. The economic slowdown reduced development pressures while giving planners and residents time to evaluate what had been accomplished and what needed adjustment. The result was a renewed commitment to the principles that had guided Vancouver's evolution since the freeway fights of the 1970s, adapted to address the realities of a city that had become a major player in the global economy. The selection of Vancouver as host city for the 2010 Winter Olympics represented another milestone in the city's evolution from regional centre to international destination. Like Expo 86, the Olympics provided both opportunities and risks, promising to accelerate development while testing Vancouver's ability to manage growth without sacrificing livability. The decision to spread events across multiple venues, including Whistler and Richmond, demonstrated a regional approach to development that recognised the interconnected nature of modern metropolitan areas. The Olympic preparations required massive infrastructure investments that would reshape transportation, housing, and recreational facilities throughout the region. The Canada Line was extended to Richmond and the airport, while the Sea-to-Sky Highway was upgraded to handle traffic between Vancouver and Whistler. These improvements served Olympic needs, but were designed primarily to support long-term regional development in ways that would benefit residents long after the Games had ended. The housing crisis that accompanied Olympic preparations forced Vancouver to confront the tensions between international investment and local affordability that had been building for decades. The displacement of low-income residents from downtown neighbourhoods generated protests and political campaigns that challenged the city's commitment to social equity. The response included new requirements for affordable housing in major developments, along with programs designed to preserve existing affordable units from conversion or demolition. The 2008 global financial crisis provided another test of Vancouver's economic resilience and planning philosophy. While many cities faced severe budget crises that forced cutbacks in services and infrastructure investment, Vancouver's diversified economy and conservative fiscal management provided relative stability. The city continued Olympic preparations while maintaining commitments to environmental protection and social programs that other jurisdictions were forced to abandon. The Olympics themselves, held in February 2010, showcased Vancouver's evolution into a mature international city capable of hosting the world's most prestigious sporting event. The Games proceeded without major incidents, while demonstrating the city's commitment to sustainability, accessibility, and cultural diversity. international visitors experienced a metropolis that had successfully balanced growth with livability, prosperity with environmental protection, and global ambitions with local values. The post-Olympic period brought new challenges as Vancouver entered its second century as an incorporated city. The success of the Games had further enhanced the city's international profile, attracting even more investments and immigration, while intensifying pressures on housing affordability and infrastructure capacity. The question facing residents and leaders was whether the planning principles that had guided Vancouver's development since the 1970s could adapt to address the realities of being a truly global city. The housing affordability crisis reached critical levels in the 2010s as international investment, particularly from China, drove residential prices beyond the reach of most local residents. Young families found themselves unable to afford homes in the city where they had grown up, while essential workers like teachers and firefighters were forced to live in distant suburbs and commute long distances to their jobs. The situation challenged Vancouver's self-image as a livable city while threatening the social diversity that had always been part of its character. The response included innovative policy measures designed to cool speculative investment while preserving legitimate housing needs. Empty homes taxes, foreign buyer taxes, and speculation taxes represented new approaches to urban housing policy that were closely watched by cities facing similar pressures around the world. These measures achieved some success in moderating price increases, but the fundamental challenge of balancing local needs with global investment remained unresolved. The climate crisis emerged as another defining challenge for a city that had long prided itself on environmental leadership. Rising sea levels threatened waterfront neighbourhoods and infrastructure, while increasing temperatures and changing precipitation patterns posed risks to the forests and watersheds that provided both economic resources and recreational opportunities. Vancouver's response included ambitious targets for carbon neutrality and climate adaptation that would require fundamental changes in how the city approached everything from transportation to building design. The COVID-19 pandemic that began in 2020 provided yet another test of Vancouver's resilience and adaptability. The economic disruption threatened many of the small businesses and cultural institutions that gave neighbourhoods their distinctive character, while public health restrictions challenged the outdoor lifestyle and community connections that made the city attractive to residents and visitors alike. The response demonstrated both the strength of Vancouver's social fabric and the ongoing need for policies that supported economic diversity and social equity. As Vancouver approached the 2020s, it faced the challenge of maintaining its reputation as one of the world's most livable cities while addressing persistent problems of affordability, inequality, and environmental sustainability. The city that had begun as a railway terminus in the wilderness had evolved into a complex metropolitan region with over 2.5 million residents. But the fundamental questions remained the same as they had been since the freeway fights of the 1970s. How could Vancouver continue to grow and prosper while preserving the natural beauty and community values that made it special? How could it balance local needs with global opportunities? How could it remain true to its history while adapting to an uncertain future? The answers to these questions would determine whether Vancouver's third century would build upon the achievements of its first two or represent a fundamental break with the principles that had guided its remarkable transformation from frontier outpost to global city. The story was far from over, and the most important chapters might still be waiting to be written. The challenges facing Vancouver in the 2020s would test every principle and innovation that had shaped its remarkable century of growth. The city stood at a crossroads where its greatest successes had created its most pressing problems. The natural beauty that drew millions of visitors annually was threatened by climate change and development pressure. The economic prosperity that had lifted living standards for generations was pricing out the very workers who made the city function. The cultural diversity that enriched community life was straining under the weight of rapid demographic change and housing displacement. The pandemic had revealed both vulnerabilities and strengths in Vancouver's urban fabric. The sudden shift to remote work emptied downtown office towers, while putting new pressure on residential neighbourhoods that became 24-hour communities for the first time. Local businesses that had served office workers struggled to survive, while others adapted to serve residents who were discovering their own neighbourhoods in entirely new ways. The crisis accelerated trends that had been building for years, forcing conversations about urban design, economic diversity, and community resilience that might have taken decades to emerge under normal circumstances. The response to these challenges drew on Vancouver's long history of citizen engagement and innovative planning. Neighbourhood groups that had cut their teeth on freeway fights in the 1970s brought decades of experience to new battles over development density and community character. Environmental activists who had protested clear-cut logging in the 1980s applied their organising skills to climate adaptation and carbon reduction. Immigrant communities that had transformed the city's cultural landscape since the 1960s demanded recognition and representation in planning processes that would shape their neighbourhoods' futures. The city government found itself managing competing pressures that seemed impossible to reconcile. International investors seeking stable returns in Vancouver real estate drove up property values that funded municipal services but displaced long-term residents. Technology companies attracted by the city's livability and educated workforce created high-paying jobs while contributing to gentrification that pushed out the service workers who made urban life possible. Tourism that showcased Vancouver's attractions to the world generated revenue and international recognition, but strained infrastructure and natural areas beyond their capacity. The solutions that emerged reflected Vancouver's pragmatic approach to urban challenges, combining innovative policy measures with grassroots community organising. The Broadway subway project, approved after decades of debate, represented a new generation of public transit investment designed to support higher density development along major corridors while preserving neighbourhood character in surrounding areas. The project faced criticism from multiple directions, with some arguing it was too expensive and others claiming it was inadequate to address regional transportation needs. But the planning process demonstrated Vancouver's commitment to public engagement and evidence-based decision-making, even when the results satisfied no one completely. Housing policy became the crucible where Vancouver's values and contradictions played out most dramatically. The city that had pioneered livable density and sustainable design found itself struggling to house the very workers who made its economy function. Teachers, firefighters and nurses faced commutes from distant suburbs because they couldn't afford to live in the communities they served. Young adults who had grown up in Vancouver discovered that staying meant accepting housing conditions and costs that would have been unthinkable for their parents' generation. The policy response included measures that seemed radical by North American standards, but were considered mainstream in European cities that had faced similar pressures for decades. Social housing projects integrated market rate and subsidized units in ways that avoided the concentration of poverty that had plagued public housing elsewhere. Inclusionary zoning requirements meant that major developments had to contribute to community housing stocks rather than simply maximizing developer profits. Cooperative housing models provided alternatives to both rental and ownership markets that were increasingly out of reach for middle-class families. The climate crisis demanded responses that went beyond individual conservation efforts to structural changes in how the city functioned. Vancouver's commitment to becoming carbon neutral by 2050 required retrofitting thousands of existing buildings, transforming transportation systems, and reimagining energy infrastructure on a scale not seen since the wartime mobilization of the 1940s. The challenge was particularly complex because the city's mild climate and abundant hydroelectric power had created energy consumption patterns that were efficient by North American standards, but inadequate for the carbon reductions that climate science demanded. The response drew on Vancouver's tradition of innovation in urban planning and environmental policy. District energy systems that captured waste heat from sewage treatment and industrial processes provided low-carbon heating for entire neighbourhoods. Building codes that required passive house standards for new construction pushed energy efficiency beyond anything previously attempted in North America. Electric vehicle charging infrastructure was integrated into parking requirements and transportation planning in ways that supported the transition away from fossil fuels while maintaining the mobility that modern urban life required. The transformation of False Creek South into a model sustainable community provided a template for climate adaptation that influenced development across the region. Solar panels and green roofs became standard features rather than expensive additions, while rainwater management systems addressed both flooding risks and water conservation needs. The neighbourhood demonstrated that environmental sustainability and urban livability were not competing goals, but complementary aspects of successful city building. The cultural evolution of Vancouver during this period reflected broader changes in Canadian society and global urban development. The city that had been predominantly British and European in character for its first century was becoming genuinely multicultural in ways that went beyond simple demographic diversity. Mandarin and Cantonese competed with English as languages of business and education, while cultural festivals celebrated traditions from every continent. The challenge was maintaining social cohesion while embracing change that transformed everything from architecture to cuisine to political priorities. The response required new approaches to civic engagement that went beyond traditional consultation processes designed for a more homogeneous population. Translation services became standard for public meetings, while cultural mediators helped bridge differences in communication styles and decision-making processes. Digital platforms allowed broader participation in planning processes, though they also created new forms of exclusion for residents who lacked technological access or skills. The education system became a laboratory for multicultural integration, as schools struggled to serve students who spoke dozens of different languages at home, while preparing them for success in Canadian society. The University of British Columbia evolved into a truly international institution that attracted students and faculty from around the world, creating research partnerships and cultural exchanges that positioned Vancouver as a Pacific Rim intellectual centre. The success of these educational initiatives provided models for other cities facing similar demographic transitions. Economic development strategies reflected Vancouver's position at the intersection of North American and Asian markets. The city's time zone allowed businesses to communicate with both New York and Tokyo during regular working hours, while cultural connections provided access to markets and investment sources that were difficult for other North American cities to penetrate. The port facilities that had launched Vancouver's growth in the railway era adapted to handle container ships carrying manufactured goods from Asia and resource products to global markets. The technology sector emerged as a major economic driver that complemented rather than replaced traditional resource industries. Video game companies, software developers, and digital media firms chose Vancouver for its quality of life and educated workforce, creating high-value jobs that didn't depend on extracting natural resources. The challenge was ensuring that this economic diversification benefited existing residents rather than simply attracting new ones who could afford the higher costs that accompanied urban success. The film industry provided another example of Vancouver's ability to adapt global opportunities to local conditions. The city became known as Hollywood North, hosting major productions that took advantage of favourable exchange rates, skilled crews, and diverse locations within easy reach of downtown hotels. The industry created thousands of jobs while showcasing Vancouver's attractions to international audiences, though residents sometimes complained about traffic disruptions and the conversion of public spaces into temporary movie sets. The arts community struggled with the same affordability pressures that affected other sectors of Vancouver society. Artists and performers who had given the city much of its cultural character found themselves priced out of neighbourhoods where they had lived and worked for decades. The response included new models of affordable studio and performance space, often integrated into mixed-use developments that combined housing, commercial, and cultural uses in ways that supported creative communities while generating revenue for developers and municipalities. Public art became a tool for community engagement and cultural expression that reflected Vancouver's evolving identity. Indigenous artists created installations that acknowledged the original inhabitants of the land while educating newer residents about histories that had been ignored or suppressed for generations. Immigrant artists contributed perspectives and techniques that enriched the visual landscape while creating connections between Vancouver and their countries of origin. The result was a public art program that served as both cultural expression and urban planning tool, creating focal points for community gathering while celebrating the diversity that had become Vancouver's defining characteristic. The relationship between Vancouver and its surrounding region became increasingly important as urban growth pressures spread beyond traditional city boundaries. The metropolitan area that had been centred on a single urban core evolved into a polycentric region where Surrey, Burnaby, and Richmond developed their own downtown areas and cultural institutions. Regional transportation systems connected these centres while preserving green belts and agricultural lands that provided both environmental benefits and economic opportunities. The governance challenges created by this regional development required new forms of cooperation between municipalities that had historically competed for investment and development. TransLink, the Regional Transportation Authority, became a model for metropolitan governance that other Canadian cities studied and adapted. The success of regional planning initiatives demonstrated that Vancouver's approach to balancing growth with livability could work at multiple scales, from individual neighbourhoods to entire metropolitan areas. The agricultural lands that surrounded Vancouver provided food security and environmental benefits, while creating ongoing tensions between preservation and development. The Agricultural Land Reserve, established in the 1970s, protected farmland from urban sprawl but also limited housing options in a region facing severe affordability pressures. The debate over agricultural land use reflected broader questions about sustainability, growth management, and regional equity that would influence Vancouver's development for decades to come. The relationship with Indigenous communities evolved from historical neglect and displacement toward recognition and reconciliation. Though progress was uneven and often controversial, land acknowledgements became routine at public events, while Indigenous place names were restored to parks and neighbourhoods that had been renamed by European settlers. More substantially, Indigenous communities became partners in major development projects, bringing traditional ecological knowledge to environmental management, while sharing in economic benefits that had historically excluded them. The downtown east side remained Vancouver's most visible reminder that urban success didn't benefit everyone equally. The neighbourhood that housed many of the city's most vulnerable residents became a focal point for debates about drug policy, mental health services, and housing rights that reflected broader challenges facing cities across North America. The concentration of social problems in a small geographic area created conditions that were devastating for residents, while undermining Vancouver's reputation as a livable city. The response to downtown Eastside challenges included innovative approaches to harm reduction, supportive housing, and community development that were studied by cities around the world. Safe injection sites, supervised consumption facilities, and drug substitution programs reduced overdose deaths while connecting users to treatment and support services. The results were encouraging but incomplete, demonstrating both the potential and limitations of public health approaches to problems that had historically been treated as criminal justice issues. The ongoing evolution of Vancouver reflected the city's capacity to adapt and innovate while maintaining core values that had guided its development since the freeway fights of the 1970s. The challenges of the 2020s were different in scale and complexity from those faced by earlier generations, but the commitment to livability, sustainability, and community engagement remained constant. The question was whether these principles could address problems that seemed to grow faster than solutions could be implemented. The global context within which Vancouver operated was changing rapidly as climate change, technological disruption, and geopolitical tensions created new uncertainties and opportunities. The city's success in managing previous transitions provided confidence that future challenges could be addressed, but also raised expectations that Vancouver would continue to serve as a model for other cities facing similar pressures. The responsibility of urban leadership had grown along with the city's international reputation. As Vancouver approached its 140th anniversary as an incorporated city, the story that had begun with railway construction in the coastal wilderness had evolved into something far more complex and significant. The small lumber town that had survived fire, depression, and war had become a metropolis that influenced urban planning practices around the world. The challenge for the next phase of development was maintaining the innovation and adaptability that had enabled this remarkable transformation while addressing problems that threatened to undermine the very qualities that made Vancouver special. The future remained unwritten, shaped by decisions that would be made by residents who understood both the opportunities and responsibilities that came with living in one of the world's most successful cities. The story of Vancouver was far from complete, with the most important chapters perhaps still waiting to be written by communities that had inherited both the achievements and challenges of more than a century of remarkable urban development on the edge of the Pacific. The path forward demanded choices that would define Vancouver for generations to come. City planners found themselves grappling with questions that had no easy answers, wrestling with trade-offs between competing visions of what the metropolis should become. The tech boom that had brought prosperity also intensified gentrification pressures that threatened to hollow out the creative communities and diverse neighbourhoods that gave Vancouver its distinctive character. Young professionals earning six-figure salaries competed for housing with families who had called these neighbourhoods home for decades, creating displacement patterns that rippled through the entire social fabric. The response required unprecedented coordination between different levels of government and community organisations. Provincial housing policies had to align with municipal zoning decisions, while federal immigration programs needed to consider local capacity constraints. The complexity was staggering, involving everything from sewer capacity to school enrollment projections, from transit frequency to park maintenance budgets. Each decision created cascading effects that planners struggled to anticipate and manage. The construction industry adapted to new realities with innovations that seemed impossible just years earlier. Modular housing factories produced entire residential units that could be assembled on site in days rather than months, addressing both speed and cost challenges that traditional construction methods couldn't solve. Cross-laminated timber buildings rose to heights previously achievable only with steel and concrete, showcasing Vancouver's forest resources while reducing carbon emissions from construction materials. These technological advances coincided with social innovations that challenged conventional approaches to urban living. Co-housing projects brought together residents who shared common facilities while maintaining private living spaces, creating communities that provided both independence and mutual support. Micro-unit developments offered affordable options for single residents, while demonstrating that good design could make small spaces both functional and comfortable. The retail landscape transformed as online shopping reduced demand for traditional commercial space while creating opportunities for new forms of community gathering. Neighborhood coffee shops evolved into informal co-working spaces where remote workers could escape cramped apartments while supporting local businesses. Pop-up markets activated underused lots and vacant storefronts, creating temporary but vibrant commercial districts that adapted quickly to changing consumer preferences and economic conditions. The food scene reflected Vancouver's multicultural evolution in ways that went far beyond restaurant diversity. Urban agriculture projects transformed vacant lots into productive gardens that supplied fresh produce to local residents while building community connections across ethnic and economic divisions. Food trucks and farmers' markets created flexible retail networks that could respond to seasonal changes and neighborhood preferences without requiring expensive permanent infrastructure. The transportation revolution accelerated during this period as electric vehicles, bike-sharing programs, and micro-mobility options reduced dependence on private car ownership. The street space previously dedicated to parking was gradually converted to wider sidewalks, protected bike lanes, and pocket parks that improved neighborhood livability while supporting more sustainable transportation choices. The changes were incremental but persistent, reshaping how residents moved through their city while reducing emissions and improving air quality. The port facilities that had launched Vancouver's original growth faced new challenges as global trade patterns shifted and environmental concerns mounted. Automation reduced employment in traditional cargo handling while increasing efficiency and reducing costs. The massive container ships that docked at Vancouver's terminals carried goods from factories that were themselves being transformed by robotics and artificial intelligence. The economic relationships that had sustained the city for over a century were evolving in ways that required completely new approaches to workforce development and economic planning. Cultural institutions adapted to serve increasingly diverse populations while maintaining their roles as gathering places for the broader community. The Vancouver Arts Gallery expanded its programming to include perspectives from Indigenous artists and recent immigrants, while the Symphony Orchestra incorporated musical traditions from the many cultures now represented in the city's population. These changes sometimes generated controversy, but they also created opportunities for cross-cultural understanding and artistic innovation that enriched the entire community. The education system became a laboratory for preparing students for a rapidly changing economy, while preserving the knowledge and skills that would remain valuable regardless of technological disruption. Coding classes appeared in elementary schools, while traditional trades programs adapted to incorporate new technologies and environmental considerations. The challenge was providing students with both the specific skills needed for available jobs and the adaptability required for careers that didn't yet exist. Healthcare delivery evolved to address the complex needs of an aging population while managing the health impacts of urban living. Community health centres integrated medical services with social support programs, recognising that housing stability and food security were as important as clinical care for maintaining population health. Mental health services expanded to address the isolation and anxiety that accompanied rapid urban change, while addiction treatment programs adapted to address new substances and changing patterns of drug use. The relationship between Vancouver and the natural environment that surrounded it required constant recalibration as urban growth pressures intensified. Salmon runs that had sustained Indigenous communities for thousands of years faced new threats from urban runoff and stream temperature increases caused by development and climate change. The response included ambitious stream restoration projects that removed concrete channels and replanted riparian forests, demonstrating that urban development and environmental restoration could complement rather than conflict with each other. The mountain parks that provided recreational opportunities and scenic backdrops for the city faced increasing pressure from growing numbers of visitors who loved these spaces, but whose presence threatened the very qualities they came to experience. Trail maintenance became a major municipal expense, while parking at trailheads created traffic problems in residential neighborhoods. The solution required new models of outdoor recreation management that balanced access with preservation while generating revenue to fund conservation efforts. The beaches and waterfront areas that defined Vancouver's relationship with the Pacific Ocean evolved to serve multiple functions as recreational space, transportation corridor, and climate adaptation infrastructure. Seawalls were redesigned to provide storm surge protection while maintaining public access and scenic views. Beach volleyball courts and cycling paths coexisted with habitat restoration projects that supported marine wildlife while educating residents about coastal ecology. The governance structures that managed this complexity reflected Vancouver's commitment to democratic participation while acknowledging the technical expertise required for effective urban management. Citizen advisory committees brought community perspectives to planning processes, while professional staff provided the technical analysis needed to evaluate different policy options. The tension between democratic input and expert knowledge was never fully resolved, but the ongoing dialogue between residents and professionals created decisions that were both technically sound and politically sustainable. The regional perspective became increasingly important as Vancouver's influence and challenges spread across municipal boundaries. Air quality management required coordination across the entire airshed, while transportation planning had to consider employment and housing patterns throughout the metropolitan area. Water supply systems drew from watersheds that extended far into the mountains, while waste management facilities served communities across multiple municipalities. The success of regional cooperation in addressing these shared challenges provided a model for other metropolitan areas facing similar coordination problems. The international connections that had shaped Vancouver since its founding as a railway terminus continue to evolve as new technologies and geopolitical relationships created fresh opportunities and challenges. Sister city relationships facilitated cultural exchanges and business partnerships, while trade missions opened markets for local products and services. The consular corps that maintained offices in Vancouver reflected the city's role as a Pacific gateway, facilitating everything from tourism to international investment to diplomatic relations. The climate adaptation efforts required unprecedented coordination between engineering solutions and natural systems management. Flood protection systems incorporated both traditional infrastructure, like pumps and dikes, and natural features like restored wetlands and expanded urban forests. The integrated approach recognized that technological solutions alone couldn't address the scale of climate impacts, while natural systems required human management to function effectively in urban environments. The economic development strategies that emerged from these challenges reflected Vancouver's position at the intersection of multiple global trends. The circular economy principles that guided waste reduction and resource recovery created business opportunities while reducing environmental impacts. Clean technology companies found Vancouver an ideal location for developing and testing innovations that addressed urban sustainability challenges while accessing markets throughout the Pacific Rim. From indigenous fishing villages to gleaming glass towers, Vancouver's transformation defies easy explanation. This is a city that rose from ashes, both literal and metaphorical, time and again. The railway terminus carved from coastal wilderness became a global metropolis through sheer determination and the courage to reimagine what urban life could be. As Vancouver faces an uncertain future, its greatest lesson remains unchanged. Cities are not just collections of buildings and infrastructure, but living expressions of human hope and ingenuity, forever shaped by those bold enough to dream of something better.